And first up, Senate Bill 437, and that's a bill that I'm sponsoring. It's one that has received quite a bit of discussion, and I will say some controversy. Senate Bill 437 basically creates a distribution model for higher education funding. It's taking the recommendations of the Joint Committee on Education and trying to come up with a long-range funding formula for higher education. This bill is number 2 on the Senate calendar, on the perfection calendar, and hope to get to it on Tuesday or Wednesday and have a good discussion on that. I was just on the radio and I said that in higher education we have limped along for decades, because when it comes to funding, it's a across-the-board increase or across-the-board decrease, regardless of how well your university is doing. We have 13 unique institutions, and we can do better. And Senate Bill 437 tries to create a model for that. Let me just give you one example of something that happened on our Appropriations Committee this week, which I did not like, which I think explains why we need a formula. We were going through the appropriations process, and a senator, a colleague, a friend of mine, put an amendment for $1.3 million from Missouri State, out of the blue. And we had somewhat agreed among ourselves that we would just take the recommendations and move from there. And so that's the way funding has been in higher ed for decades. It's who's got the political strength, who's at the table, universities fighting against each other, and that's the wrong way to fund higher education. So that was a perfect example of why we need a formula. Because I don't want to be put in the unenviable position of being chairman of the Senate Education Committee and have to fight against Missouri State on the floor. That doesn't do anybody any good. And so if we can come up with a funding formula that treats all the universities the same based on performance, I think that's the way to go. Right now, we have complete support from the community colleges, but we're having some trouble from the 4 years. And I have tasked the presidents of the university to give me some language by the end of today, amendments that they can live with, ways that they want to see the bill changed as it goes through the process. So we'll be ready to discuss it next week. So that's a tough bill, but yeah, we're going to go forward and we're going to get some discussion. I'd love to see it pass the Senate this week and head on over to the House. Obviously, if you've been in my office, you've seen my shrine to UCM. So it's UCM and others, but it's also important in my capacity that I look at statewide implications as well, because higher education is important for the entire state. So with that, I'd be glad to take any questions you might have.
Senator, we, as a board, appreciate everything that you do, attempt to do for the University of Central Missouri. It's in your district, and I know we lean on you from time to time for assistance and help, and we appreciate the assistance that we do get, and also from Denny in the House. The current status, I was glad to hear you say that you've requested some amendments, and I have no idea what those amendments are going to be. I do know that the board is concerned, and the unknown always bothers everybody, and we're no different no matter how old we are. We never get used to the unknown. But the one of the points in the legislation is with respect to the percentages of the monies that are going to community colleges as opposed to four-year institutions. And as I understand it, the community colleges stand to gain some 14% in appropriations. And that obviously means there has to be a reduction. That reduction is in four-year institutions, and that four-year institutions would include University of Central Missouri. And I would like to know how do you view this as being of assistance to the University of Central Missouri? Because obviously we're part of the state of Missouri and part of the higher education, and been going through the process, our faculty, staff, and everybody, of budget reductions, that type of thing. And this bothers us, this reduction, and I'd like to know what about that is something that we as a board could feel comfortable with.
It's a work in progress, and when we first proposed the bill, we put in language to deduct half of the local contribution for community colleges. So we basically were reducing their local effort, obviously, their operating levy for the community colleges. I mean, community colleges do have another funding source that 4 years don't. And so what we tried to do was to cut that in half so there wouldn't be a wide swing in overall contributions from community colleges to 4 years. I'll be honest, community colleges have probably more political input and more grassroots support in the legislature than 4 years do. That was something that community colleges felt that they could not live with, not necessarily because it gave them more money, but because they felt that if we deducted half the local match, that they could never, ever have another operating levy increase, because the local folks would feel that the state was penalizing them for not supporting and not taking advantage of the entire local match. And so that decision was made in committee by a 7-3 vote to basically not deduct half their match. What that does, it goes from 15% of the overall pie for community colleges up to 20%. Now, if I was sitting in front of the State Fair Community College Board of Governors right now, they would be thrilled, because their main talking point is that they educate 42% of the higher education students, but yet only get 15%. And so these are very, very tough decisions that we have to talk about when it comes to overall funding for higher education.
So I think you can understand what our concern is.
Right.
I think this institution, its faculty and staff do a tremendous job educating people. And those who graduate from here, I assume you would agree that it does a fine job of educating people.
Right.
And it's one that frankly, it's disturbing to us that these people are tightening their belts around here. And yet we're faced with the fact that there's going to be a reduction, basically, based on the percentages. And we're just at a loss. I understand politics. That's a misnomer. I'm sorry. I don't understand it. I from time to time pick up a glimpse of what happens in it, and this is one of those things that obviously I think we would love to see. If you want to give us a chance to smile like the State Fair Board is smiling now, for that part of this legislation to some way be modified so that we as an institution realize some benefit from what we've been trying to do and what these people are trying to do.
Well, there are many benefits for performance funding, and there are a lot of disadvantages with the status quo. I don't feel that is in the long-term best interest of UCM, and so I think going this route is the best route. And if you're a university that is excelling and accomplishing the things that you as a board have set out, I don't think you have anything to worry about. And certainly, any amendments and things like that you want to have brought forward, we'll certainly take a look at those. But we are going to debate the bill on the floor next week.
Okay. Now, you have people you say that are going to be submitting amendments to you today?
Well, I visited with Dr. Troy Pano, and he was representing all three universities. And I made it very clear to him that I would like to have amendments brought to our office by the end of today on how they can make the bill better. You know, to me, it's very easy to just sit back and say, no, we don't like it. And I think we can do better than that. And so if there are ways that we can do that, I'd like to hear that.
Well, good. I do hope that there's some way that some change can be made which will, acknowledge this institution and not put us at a disadvantage.
We can see that performance funding currently in the budget is a good thing. I mean, because obviously by performance funding, the university will be getting more money than if they didn't, than just across the board increase.
Anybody else on the board got any questions or observations about it? Yes.
Senator, on this performance funding, it's a great idea, it's a productive idea, it's a healthy idea. And of course, we've, on this board and faculty and all the representatives here, we're committed to it. But it seems to me, you made a statement earlier that the political environment push the 2-year school to be considered on this. And another statement, we talked about the political environment of another institution that asked for X amount of money to come into the formula for their funding for this year, and that was added. It seems to me that if the bill passes, that each year the non-performing schools or the lesser performing schools are those that are performing, that have special needs, that are not living up to the criteria of other institutions, will have that same political clout that can come before you and the state. And, you know, if their voice is loud enough, it'll be modified and it'll go that way.
You're exactly right. Currently, there are 3 universities that, according to the model, are overfunded. Some of my colleagues think that we should just indiscriminately close 2 colleges right now, but the political implications won't allow that to happen. And so, right now in the bill, there is something called a stop-loss provision that a university could never receive anything less than 98% of their current budget. So it would never be like a 10 or 15 or 20% decrease in that. But you're right. I mean, you can never divorce the politics from this process. But I think performance funding helps in that direction.